Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to present a paper that's co-authored with Sylvia Kritzinger in the audience on my right-hand side. And it's provisionally titled The Demand Side of Militant Democracy, How Elite Frames Shape Citizen Support for Party Bans. I would like to start with a quick exercise. I would like to ask you to take a few seconds to read the two statements on the slide. And so now I would like to ask you whether you think the first or the second statement is more likely to be supported by citizens. So if with the show of your hands, if you can show me who thinks it's the first statement. And now the second. Right, we think so too. We also think that this is exactly how democratic backsliding takes place at the moment. So when Donald Trump attacked Venezuela recently and captured President Maduro, his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said this was a law enforcement function to capture an indicted drug trafficker. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So what we know is that democratic backsliding is happening at the moment everywhere, in established as well as non-established democracies. There's a lot of research being done on this, and three key points stand out as to why this takes place. First, undemocratic behavior is more likely to be tolerated when polarization is high. Second, undemocratic behavior is more likely to be tolerated by citizens when it's done by an in-party member or an in-party politician, meaning that partisanship matters. And finally, when a politician violates the principle of civil liberties, it's less likely to be punished than when they violate a principle of free and fair elections or the rule of law, meaning those two latter principles citizens care about more as opposed to civil liberties. Nonetheless, most research examines these vignettes or examples in isolation. One example from recent research is that by Frederickson in 2022. Politicians said court rulings by judges appointed by opposing parties should be ignored. But normally, when politicians say so, they do so with a clear justification. So then we ask, do political justifications increase public support for undemocratic behavior? Do they make proposal appear as defending democracy? And if so, which justifications are most effective? And to do this, we argued that the perfect way of testing this, what we think is an interesting research question, is to ask people about party bans. Party bans, on the one hand, violate a core democratic principle of free and fair elections. We see from studies such as Ferrian and Creasy in 2025 that this is the principle that people value the most. But on the other hand, party bans are also a quintessential measure of militant democracy. Militant democracy is a concept introduced by Karl Löwenstein in the late 1930s as fascism was gaining ground across Europe, to argue that certain institutional restrictions on anti-democratic actors should be allowed to protect democracy from internal threats. And so, as such, party bans have historically served as tools of democratic defense, but on the other hand, they can also be used as instruments of democratic erosion, making them an ideal case for studying how elite frames can shape citizen perceptions. We try to mix different justification frames. One justification frame is the one that's been recently used by populist leaders to argue that the elites are corrupt and to subvert democracy. So we were interested in how willing people are to support this frame. And then the two other frames that we introduce are the national security frame and the social justice frame, which are the classical militant democracy frames. So anti-corruption, frequently used by backsliders. The other two frames, quintessential militant democracy frames. We also ask, who do different frames appeal to? So we believe that anti-corruption is a valence issue, so it should have a broad appeal across citizens from all ideologies, but especially among populist voters, given that populists focus on corruption as one of the key themes of their agendas. Then we also believe that national security will resonate rather broadly, but also more with conservative and right-leaning voters. This paradigm frames party ban as necessary to exclude the extremist party from competition. And finally, we have the social justice frame, which we believe will appeal more to the progressive or left-leaning individuals. And this frame is used to justify measures of party bans when parties are neglecting vulnerable groups or being discriminatory towards them. Research design. So we have a vignette experiment, which is fully randomized, and we have 4 conditions, 3 treatments and 1 control. One person only receives 1 treatment at a time, and then afterward, the only difference in the treatments is the justification. So they all receive the same party ban proposal, which is the government says, the government proposes that some of the opposition parties should be banned. Nonetheless, the justifications differ. And then we measure citizen support on different outcome variables. First, we are interested in how willing people are to support this proposal. Secondly, we are also interested in whether they believe this proposal makes the country more or less democratic. If they say it makes the country more democratic, that goes along the lines of saying this is a militant democracy measure. If they're more likely to say it's affecting democracy in a negative way, it's more along the lines to say that they believe that this is democratic erosion. And finally, we test institutional legitimacy, which is to say, if this decision was to be implemented, how would you still respect the decision? Should this decision be respected? And we also did it in 2 cases which we believe are perfect for this question. Germany, which is a classical case of a militant democracy given its Nazi past, where party bans have been imposed multiple times, and where currently there are discussions of banning the AfD. And then we have the United States, which has been a lot more shy when it comes to these measures, where freedom is differently put in the culture. And so we believe that this is a perfect combination of 2 countries following the most different system design to test this research question. We have the sample size of 6,000 participants in total, 3,000 per each country, giving us a lot of power. On to the results. So what do we find? As expected, justifications matter. Compared to the control, any justifications make citizens more likely, as you see on the top, to believe that it makes the country more democratic. It also makes them support the proposal more, and finally, increases the institutional legitimacy of the proposal. However, we see some difference in which justifications are more powerful than others. Security and anti-corruption frames are the strongest, have the largest effect, and they're similar. And social justice, as expected, has the weakest effect. Of the 3 of them, anti-corruption frames are marginally stronger than the security frames, which is somewhat surprising given that this is not a classical militant democracy frame, and this is something that we should be discussing now normatively. And now to the main takeaways. So as already mentioned, justifications matter. Whatever justification people were provided with, they were more likely to believe that then that proposal is democracy enhancing. They're more likely to support the proposal, and they would also be more likely to respect it if it was implemented. Somewhat surprisingly, the anti-corruption frame generates the largest effects, followed closely by national security. This is a normative concern. This has been the frame that's been used by populists recently. So if these claims are baseless and people believe them, then we have the issue of democratic backsliding. So this is something to worry about and think about further. We also see cross-national consistency. So despite these different historical histories of party bans in Germany and the United States, results are remarkably similar in both countries. I have it in the appendix slide if anybody's interested in the country dynamics. So it's important also to note that we're not necessarily interested in whether militant democracy should be implemented or not. We are interested in what people think about it, whether they think it should be implemented or not. Another caveat of this research is to say that we aren't testing whether the parties in question are actually corrupt or actually discriminatory. We're only interested in the elite frames and how much people buy into them and how much it affects then their perceptions of the proposals as democratic or undemocratic. There's more work to be done. This is a first step in this research. First, it would be very important to see, given that still in liberal democracies, multiple voices are allowed to be heard. So the future work should explore how counter-arguments by targeted parties would affect public support for party bans. Secondly, does it matter who makes the arguments? So future research could test whether who justifies a party ban matters for the support and the perception of it being democratic versus undemocratic, whether it's prominent politicians or independent institutions such as courts. And finally, we tested on a hard case on free and fair elections. One could argue, but does this transfer to other dimensions of democracy, such as the rule of law and civil liberties? These are the questions that should be addressed in the future. That would be all. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.